there by telling them that they were my principal nominee for West Point, for the United States Naval Academy, and for the Air Force Academy. And if you had a chance to be with me and to hear from the selection committee that makes these decisions and to meet these young people, they would continue or perhaps restore your confidence in the younger generation of Americans. Uniformly, accomplished academically, athletically, but young people of great character and commitment and dedication and humble. Not one of them said, I always knew I would get this. Not one of them said, I alone have done this. All of them said, this is a tribute to my teachers, to my parents, to my classmates. I'm surprised I'm being selected, and I'm honored to have the chance to serve. One of the most important things about American leadership, and you are the leaders of Delaware. You are folks, whether in the nonprofit community, the business community, the faith community, in your own businesses and your own families. You are the leaders who embody what I think of as the values of leadership that have made Delaware such a special place for so many years. Focus on others, putting others before self, making service a central part of what you do and why you do it, being willing to listen to people from different perspectives, and being determined to leave this place better than you found it. That's exactly why I think our state chamber is vibrant and strong. That's exactly why I think the civic institutions of Delaware are so strong. And that's exactly why I feel like I commute to an alien planet where I serve with a lot of people who I don't know what's going on in their states, but they don't seem to be getting some of these same messages. I'm going to just briefly reference my favorite role model president. I've had a lot of great leadership lessons in my life. I had the chance to be a clerk for Judge Roth. Some of you know Jane Richards Roth, who was a spectacular judge. Smart and humble, hardworking, and always prepared, with a razor-sharp wit in chambers and with a commanding presence in the courtroom. And I had the opportunity to serve both a guy, Gene Lang, who founded the I Have a Dream Foundation nationally and was just one of the most inspiring people I'll ever meet, and Bishop Tutu in South Africa. And if we had another half an hour, or I get to do this again another year, I'd be happy to walk through what I learned from them. When I've had the opportunity to share my own leadership lessons, what I mostly do is talk about mistakes I've made. Because the way to make good decisions is to make bad decisions and learn from them. So when I've had a chance to sit down with a new county executive or a new mayor or a new state rep or a city council person, I tend to focus on the mistakes I've made. I'd be happy to do that at length here, but perhaps it's best if I move along, since that would take a long time. My favorite president, Harry Truman. Harry Truman was the unexpected president. Harry Truman never thought he would be president of the United States. Harry Truman was a county executive, they call him county judges out in Missouri, and he had a very uneven start. As of age 30, he was an abject failure. He had failed at everything he had tried, at being a small businessman, at being a farmer, some would even say at being a son-in-law. He was a dedicated husband, he was a loyal father, but he was not a huge success as a young man. And he never forgot what it felt like to be on the outside looking in, or in a small town trying to figure out how to make it big. It was an accident of history that he became president, and yet he made some of the most important decisions that laid the framework for the world we have today. He didn't name it the Truman Plan, he named it the Marshall Plan, but he led the rebuilding of Europe at a moment when the United States was the most powerful nation on earth, the only nation with a workable atomic bomb, the largest military, and 90% of the world's manufacturing capacity because everyone else was flattened. Rather than imposing our will on the world as a new empire, he said, we are committed to human rights, transparency, and democracy, and created the United Nations and rebuilt Western Europe, and frankly, saved democracy. From integrating the armed forces to recognizing the state of Israel, he did bold things that were really unpopular at the time. He left office as the most unpopular president, certainly of the first half of the 20th century. And yet over time, many of his decisions have been seen as very wise. What do I like most about Harry Truman? The day he finished being president, he and Bess packed up the car, no escorts, drove themselves home to his little house that I visited on Delaware Avenue in Independence, Missouri. and settled into retirement. He did not expect or ask for a big pension or a presidential museum. It was his staff that insisted that somebody build him some monument of some kind. But he was always vaguely embarrassed by it and did not like the pomp and circumstance associated with being a former president. A humble man from a humble state who did his job as he saw it, made decisions that were hard, held himself accountable for those that didn't work, and left us a legacy that has served us well for 70 years. Last, there are some amazing lessons in leadership in a book that I tend to go to for guidance. And whether you look at it as great literature or as scripture, as I do, someone who works with me last night reminded me that humbling lessons in leadership are never very far from us, thanks to the Gideons. I do something every year. I ask everybody who works for me to give anonymous input on how I'm doing. We do an annual internal review. I get it on Jim, who's my state director. I get it on my chief of staff in DC, and I get it on me. And I was feeling a little grumpy last night because I'm reading it. And I'll tell you, I got some folks who work for me who are not in love with me right now. This has been a hard year. We have faced hard decisions. And sometimes commuting from Delaware to DC makes me a little cranky by the end of the day. And so as I was reflecting on this input, this wonderful, talented, capable young man who serves with me said, "Just like Moses, huh?" I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You're saying the folks who work for you are complaining and they're unhappy and they're not thrilled with your leadership." I said, "Uh-huh." He said, "Just like Moses." And I went, "Yeah, you're right." And I've only been doing this 7 years. Moses had another 33. Think about it. Literally the greatest leader of Torah, an anointed leader of the people of Israel, spent 40 years having them disobey him, dislike him, threaten him. Every time he turned around, they put up another golden calf. He comes down from Sinai with the tablets of the rule of God, and they're throwing a party. I have 3 teenagers at home. This sounded vaguely familiar. I'm trying to fix the tax code of the United States, and I can't get you to go to sleep. And if you think about story after story after story in the Bible, the most obscure, least likely person is chosen to be leader. What does Moses do when called to leadership? Why me? Why not him? My brother's handsome. He's a great speaker. Why me? Over and over and over, there are why me moments. And if we had the time, I'd walk through in Old and New Testament the stories of why me leadership. From David, the runt of the litter, such an obscure child that the parent of his family forgot he was even, I guess I have another son, but he's somewhere off chasing sheep, to the greatest leader of them all. We need to remember that when we look for leadership, we should look for it in unusual and unexpected places. That when we look for leadership, often we should look within ourselves. That when we look for leadership, we need to remember that our most important leadership moments are in our homes and in our immediate communities, because our children and our neighbors are watching what we do and how we do it. I will try to more humbly be more mindful that at the end of a 12-hour day, I should suck it up, have one more cup of coffee, and say what an enormous blessing it is to have the opportunity to represent you in the United States Senate. And I hope you will remember that the United States is a great nation, not because we are mighty, but because we have wonderful values. Values of servant leadership, values that put others above ourselves, and values that have built a global community on common principles of democracy and rule of law. I am concerned that those very principles are being tested and will be tested in the months and years ahead. And I think the way forward is for us in Washington to behave as we do here in Delaware, to listen to each other, to show up early, to do our work, and to have faith. Thank you. I got 10 minutes for questions. Please don't be shy. It has been a rock'em sock'em robots process getting us to this point. A number of you, by the way, have been effective, vigorous, and repeated sources of advice and input on this tax bill. Please.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Thank you for what you shared this morning. It really touched my heart. I'm a mom of 8. I'm a Girl Scout leader, a Boy Scout leader, where I started overseas. leadership all day, every day. I grew up overseas, went back to serve, so I acknowledge and appreciate what you shared this morning, especially the week before Christmas. It was very, thank you. It was just an acknowledgement, not a question.
Thank you. Who else has got a question, some advice?
Senator, thank you. Some advice for those of us who are committed to unity and modeling the very values that we sometimes see being challenged more dramatically today. How can we make a difference? What can we be doing as engaged citizens?
I mean, first, lead the organizations and institutions you are called to lead in ways that model integrity, accountability, transparency, and hope. We have a more divided country than I've known at any point in my life. Whether it's the outcome of the Mueller investigation or the path forward on the tax bill, whether it's how we should be handling health care or what we should be doing with regard to our allies and opponents overseas. All I need is 5 minutes on Twitter, and I can show you a deeply divided country. Part of what I think is corrosive to our sense of common purpose nationally is the ways in which people can be anonymous. I don't know about you, but in high school, it was never a good idea for there to be a place where people could write things without having to sign them, because when they did, they wrote things that were mean and unkind and unthoughtful. And the internet, this great, liberating force, allows people to just vent. And I do not think it is unleashing our best angels, in fact, the opposite. So encourage the folks with whom you work to express themselves, but to do so in a way that they would be proud to have shared with their children or parents, to be measured and thoughtful, and to keep in mind what are they trying to build, not what are they trying to destroy. It takes a long time to build things. You can quickly tear them down. I'm thinking about Truman a lot these days because I think about the legacy that generations of men and women in the Foreign Service and the military, in our development professionals and those who serve overseas as missionaries or in nonprofits, what they've built in terms of our relations in the world and our standing. You can undo things like that very quickly. So trust and hope are hard things to build. Keep building them. That's the most important thing we can do, is do whatever you're called to do, whether it's to be a mother or father, leader of an organization, someone who works with 5 people or who leads an organization of 5,000. Do it with integrity. I'm the co-chair of the Senate Ethics Committee. My co-chair and I, who's my best friend in the Senate, there are mysterious moments. We were just commiserating about stuff. And one of the things I said was, if we had more members who felt certain that they would in the end be accountable for everything they did, publicly or privately, that it's all known and all knowable, then we wouldn't need an ethics committee and an ethics code, right? So if we conduct ourselves as if everything we do will one day be known, we'll be okay.
Thank you.
Please.
From your first year in the Senate to now, how did we get to where we are now?
Well, where are we now? Let me ask a grounding question. A place of profound division.
The most politically divisive state we've ever been in, I think.
Can I tell you a quick story? So it's my first. This is a long-winded answer to a simple question. Thus, the sign that I've been in the Senate for a little while. There's a senator from Vermont. He's the most senior Democrat. When I first got seated, he was the president pro tem. And the chairman of the committee, one of the 4 committees on which I served, Judiciary. And I went to Patrick, it's Patrick Leahy, and asked him whether he'd ever seen a time so divided, whether there'd been a time so divided, because I was elected in the Tea Party wave of 2010. Not because of, but in spite of, but still, rode in on the way. And I said to Patrick, you've been here a long time. He said, I know. I said, and you've seen 7 presidents come and go. I figure. I said, has it ever been this divided in the Senate? He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. I said, during your time? He goes, oh no. I said, when was it this divided? He said, Civil War. There's a cautionary note in there. We had decades of slouching towards the Civil War, an inevitable conflict of internal division that was literally the bloodiest civil war on the planet up until that time. And we had statesmen and leaders who avoided it through compromise. Remember the compromise of 1840, 1850, right? Until finally it was unavoidable. We should not repeat that mistake. How did we get here? By questioning each other's motives, not just questioning each other's policies. By refusing to see ourselves in the other. By describing our political opponents as crazy. By refusing to watch their TV. Neil Cavuto sent me a letter last week thanking me for coming on Fox. Why is he sending me a letter thanking me for going on Fox? Of course I'd go on Fox. Why wouldn't I? He sent it to me because so few other Democrats are ever willing to go on Fox and defend their views. We don't debate each other on the floor. We don't engage each other on television, and I mean senators, because we increasingly simply listen to and talk to our little silo. But think about Thanksgiving dinner. For most American families, Thanksgiving dinner is the time when everybody gathers, not just your nuclear family, but everybody, including those folks you don't see that often. And I don't know about your Thanksgiving, but mine has featured for 30 years someone at one end of the table and someone at the other end of the table. Somebody with views kind of over here and somebody with views kind of over here. We inevitably get into a fight. It's great. One year we just pre-fought. We just agreed to go out in the garage and yell at each other for 15 minutes. So everybody else could enjoy Thanksgiving and watch some football and have some great food. The vast majority of America, I'm convinced, is the folks in the middle of the table who just want to have some turkey and talk about the football game and catch up on their nieces and nephews and don't want to yell at each other. So we have a news environment that privileges the yelling over the listening. And we have a leadership environment nationally that rewards stirring up. And there aren't the incentives for coming together are fewer and fewer. I believe I represent a state that will reward me for working across the aisle. There's a tax bill coming later today that I'm not very excited about. I'm going to vote against. But I worked my butt off to persuade Bob Corker and Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, and Mike Lee that there was another way, that there were a dozen Democrats willing to vote for a major corporate rate cut and a real middle-class tax cut that would have cost $1 trillion less. Most of my colleagues said this is a crazy thing for you to be doing because it'll get out that you were willing to work with the Republicans on a big tax cut. And I kept going, yeah, I think it'd be a better alternative. Most states are no longer rewarding people for compromise. We're sending the wrong message. The structure of our government only works if there's compromise. It doesn't work without compromise. And my party, I'm afraid, is going to elevate candidates for the presidency who are models of refusal to compromise. Just saying. Who else has got one last question before, because he keeps getting closer. He keeps moving behind me. And I have an 8:31 train, is that correct? Yes. Please, Chair.
Comment on net neutrality and the change to that.
Great question, Chair. Thank you. So, here's the good news about net neutrality. Our younger generation is very engaged. I don't know how well informed they are, but they're very engaged. I got 3 times as many, well, not calls, but emails, since I don't think they know how to use phone to talk to people, but they're really good at emailing. I got thousands of emails from Delawareans about net neutrality. 3 times as many as I got about a $1.5 trillion tax bill that is going to reset the ground for whole industries for a generation. That says something. The Appropriations Subcommittee on which I serve as the ranking Democrat has responsibility for the FCC. I've known Ajit Pai for a number of years now. And I was in that role when Chairman Wheeler put in place the net neutrality rule. and I've heard the arguments both sides. It is not a simple black and white matter. I do think there are arguments that the previous net neutrality rule overregulated. I am gravely concerned about what a wide open internet can mean in terms of allowing some ISPs to throttle content and to privilege content. If the major players take full advantage of this light touch regulation, as Ajit puts it, you will see a fundamentally different internet. Your experience will be different, the economic incentives will be different. I don't think we should do this without a significant number of hearings. The FCC is acting within their statutory authority to make major regulatory rulings, pro or con. It was a straight party line vote when done under Obama. It's a straight party line vote when done under Trump. I frankly think we ought to have a broader discussion about what's this going to mean. Because on the one side, you've got innovation and openness to content from all sources. And on the other side, you've got a business model that is being required to invest billions and billions of dollars in bigger pipe and more capacity, and claims they can't sustain that without this lighter regulation. I have not gotten hundreds of inputs or even dozens from Delawareans saying, I want to pay more for my internet. I did not hear that from anybody. So I think our challenge is to sift out the noise and to figure out what's the regulatory framework that will lead to real investment in the next and the next and the next generation. Because what we're expecting, do your kids expect that they're going to be able to watch any football game, any TV show, anytime, anywhere, and you're paying the bill? Sorry, I'm emoting too much now, right? Anybody who's got 3 teenagers knows that these things are not free and that the cost continues to go up dramatically. I respect deeply the concerns about content and about what it means to have very powerful integrated companies that can say what you're going to see on your feed and you're not really going to know it is the stuff that we provide and that we have an relationship with, and stuff that's over there. It's never going to show up in your feed. You could find it if you know to go search for it aggressively and pay extra, but you're not going to see it. So it leads to the core question, what is the internet? What do we want it to be? In other places on Earth, and I'll remind you, our president released a national security strategy yesterday where he correctly identified Russia and China as major alternative competitive models for governance. The internet in Russia and China is a profoundly different thing than it is here. And most Americans aren't paying attention to that. For most of the population of the world, their government strictly limits what they can get access to, what moves, and at what speed. We are not talking about that. But the United States has always been the other extreme, for better or worse. There are times it feels like the bathroom wall, but there's also times where it is, as John McCain, God bless him, has said, this wild, crazy, wonderful, boisterous, creative country we call America. For me, I prefer freedom. Thank you all very much for listening to
reverse things a little bit. First of all, thank you, Senator. Thank you for being the person who thought of Taste of Delaware. Senator, Nathan, you're 3 senators and 3 teenagers, and the main thing you're worried about is them going to sleep. You're way ahead of yourself. Chris, thank you. Thank you for the tribute on the Senate floor. I can tell you, when I was 12 years old, my father and my grandfather, who was a judge up in Pennsylvania, and my father sat and watched the Democratic convention in 1960. I nominated John Kennedy. And I decided at that time I was getting into politics.